Hi, everybody. Really appreciate you coming. This is the, I think I don't know, 12th or 13th edition of the expert interview series. If you ever want to see some of the archives, they're on the Columbia Omni studio site. And we just really appreciate your attendance and your involvement. And a lot of people have said really nice things about this exercise, which we really appreciate. And today we have with us Cal McNeil, who is with the Cfda. For those who don't know what that is, that's the Council of Fashion Designers of America. And it's a very, what I think of as a very prestigious organization and a very influential organization. But they have done a lot over the last few years regarding sustainability. And it's really quite impressive what they've put together. I'll leave it. I'll bring Cal on. We'll talk a little bit about the CFDA in general, and then go right into sustainability in the supply chain and manufacturing, which is Cal's expertise. Okay, and Cal McNeil is the Associate Director of Strategic Programs for the CFDA. So we welcome Cal.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, Cal.
Hey.
Hey, nice to have you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk about this.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. So as we just mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about CFDA and what is the CFDA for the people on the audience that don't know what that is.
Sure. So I think even people who know CFDA, they don't realize it's actually two different organizations under one roof, which is the CFDA Inc., which is a trade association that supports designers at every stage of their career, and they're actually CFDA members. So you pay dues to be a part of the that one side of the organization. And in turn, we give opportunities for them to grow their businesses in many ways that we'll discuss, through some of the other questions that you have set for us. But then there's actually the other piece, which is the foundation, which actually some of my work falls under around our manufacturing initiative, which we'll touch on, as well as charitable initiatives also. So, really thinking about many different programs that we have under CFDA, from student scholarships to emerging designer competitions and different programs as well, whether it's the CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund, which is probably our most notable, to other programs like Elango Launchpad for designers 0 to 3 years in business, all the way up to different partnerships, different programs, educational opportunities, professional development as well for more of those established brands, and then engaging with different designers all the way up to the board of directors that we have, the first name designers like, the Calvins, the Ralphs, the Donnas of the world, that we engage with in a very different way than we would with a student or an emerging brand. So it's really an opportunity for us to help drive their business into a global landscape and help them grow overall, I would say, within those two organizations.
Yeah. So you say help their business. Is it really designers as business owners, or could it be a designer that that works for a third party?
So the member is tied to an individual rather than a company. So, but they could be a business owner, but it could also be a designer for a large company, like the creative director of Lululemon could be a member. And so really helping them, join in the designer community versus maybe someone that actually owns their own namesake brand, and helping them actually build their own business also. So it just depends on the type of designer we're engaging with, and the type of designer that is actually the CFDA member within the organization. But we actually help within both sides of it, whether it's actually their business or a business that they happen to just be a part of, whether it's, past like Marc Jacobs at Louis Vuitton, or, a different designer at some of those larger companies, like I mentioned, like Lululemon or others as well, or versus, a Brandon Maxwell, an Altazara, a Jason Wu, those type of people that actually have their own business also.
Right. And is it just like dressmaking, or apparel making, or can it also be the technical side of designing? Can it be just a colorist who just puts together color stories?
Sure. So it's more of the designer for like the finished products specifically. So, but it is ready to wear accessories, which we consider, many different categories under that, and jewelry as well. So it's not as much for the technical designer. Usually, what we would have is actually like the creative director or the head designer or the owner of the business be the CFDA member. But luckily, within a lot of the different programs we do, and especially within the professional development side, is that it gives the opportunity for the designer's team to actually take advantage of these opportunities as well. So that technical designer can sit on a webinar where they learn about different aspects of their kind of piece of the puzzle that they have within the designer's business to actually help themselves and help their team, or an e-commerce strategist or the production director, or social media manager. It kind of runs the gamut within what other team members can take advantage of the CFDA's network and the programs that we have to drive the overarching business forward.
So your title is the Associate Director of Program Strategies, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes,
got it right that time.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What does that entail? What do you do at CFDA?
Sure. So actually, it's a really interesting time for that because we just merged teams late last year with a few different teams. So I'm actually a part of a team that has fashion supply chain, professional development, education, and sustainable strategies all under one team. And we very much consider ourselves kind of the meat on the bone of the organization because the majority of the programs that we operate fall under one of those four areas that I just mentioned. And so I do lead specifically supply chain manufacturing, and then now moving into select sustainability programming that we've done for over 10 years at CFDA actually, which is really, really remarkable to see, and also see so much that's changed in the industry to become more sustainable. But I focus on those areas. And so what I do is not only design new programs and operate existing programs that we've had, over the last, 6-7 years that I've been at CFDA, but also really strategize around what's next, what's new, and what can we do to enhance that suite of programs and initiatives that really do drive their business forward, to say, let's focus this year on material innovation and sustainability within that, piece of supply chain, or think about logistics and shipping, or think about how does inventory management fall into the play of everything here. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to strategize around kind of like what the designer needs and listen to the needs there. And they're ever changing. So it's always us, strategizing around new things that we can do to cater to them, and then build programs to actually make that happen. And that can be simple programs down to webinars or talks, all the way up to a custom, partnership with someone like Alexis or in NFL or all these other kind of fashion adjacent companies that share our values, and they want kind of that piece of fashion, and they can actually end up giving us the opportunity through funding and through like educational opportunities to actually build, those different programs for, in the end, the designers benefit in the end.
Interesting. Through partnerships.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's neat. So what does the CFDA have to do with supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually think most people would never even think of CFDA and supply chain in the same sentence. And that's something that, really speaks to kind of like the work that we've been doing at CFDA for so many years, over 50 years, almost 60 years, actually, I think we're at now, is a lot of marketing, a lot of, speaking to how to get a designer on the fashion map and bring them to the global audience as well, which I think we do really well now. But I think going back to the basics, and what I kind of tried to do a few years ago with my team, is switch back to the foundation of the business, which is I consider to be the supply chain. And it's the first thing you have to get through before you can even think about Fashion Week, before you can think about, different press polls for celebrities, thinking about selling it to retailers. You have to have the physical product. And so you have to go through that chain to actually create that. And so what we do, at CFDA now is to create those resources to not only educate the designers, but also connect them with global resources that relate to supply chain as well. Because if we don't have programs like this, all the other programs that we have around marketing and everything else, can't be as successful as it would be if we had these programs as well. So I think it's like really taking it back to the basics of the designer's business, making sure that's really safe and sound, and then growing the business from there. And so just making sure that access and knowledge is top, and at the forefront of what we're doing for supply chain programs, and then kind of go from there. But it really did start with our fashion manufacturing initiative that I think we'll probably touch on as well. That kind of inspired everything else over the last 4 or so years that I started working on supply chain programs at CFDA.
And I don't mean this in a controversial way, but do you think that schools could be preparing people better to understand supply chain before they get out of school?
I definitely do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not saying that there's a lack of great educators out there, but I think that a lot of the design schools are only focused on design, and there's so much more to, number one, what career you can go into outside of design, and then the ancillary pieces that you have to know to be able to do that around product development and everything around tech packs, the color piece of everything. And so I do feel like there needs to be more focus on that. And so it seems like some of the students do come out of school knowing, great design aesthetic, and they have, a viewpoint, which is incredible, but they want to start a business. And then they get to this first step and it's just a big question mark for them. And so I really do think that there should be more of a focus on that. I didn't go through design school, so I can't speak to as like where the holes are kind of, within the curriculum, but I do know there's certain aspects that they do learn the basics of, but I definitely think there should be more of an emphasis on it, or an equal emphasis on design and processes, as well, to really set them up for more successful careers, I think.
I bet you soon there'll be degrees available for sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely grad programs I've seen around sustainable practices and outside of fashion and inside fashion. We work with NYU and many different schools around that already. And so it's definitely going to become even more of a focus.
Interesting. And I don't know, what was it, 5-10 years ago when people started really talking about sustainability, it didn't look like it was going to be sustained. It seemed like it was just a kind of a flash word and kind of flash in the pan, and that it wasn't going to last, but it surely has. And it's not only in the fashion industry, which could use it, but many other industries too. So it definitely seems like there's something there.
Yeah, and I definitely honestly think I've never heard so many people that we've tried to engage with around sustainability over the last 10 years that our team has been working on it, that finally, woke up during COVID last year to actually start to make, real change within their business models. And it was a very interesting trend to see people that we've been reaching out to, trying to engage them with our programs, and they finally kind of grasp onto it during the time of COVID, when they were switching their business models anyway, to kind of adapt to that, and now really considering sustainability as a top priority for their business. So it's an interesting time, even the last 12 months.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you separately about manufacturing, but it's really kind of, when you think about it, a subset of the supply chain, right? You were talking about the transportation, the designing, those are really all that, and manufacturing kind of folds into the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. It is such a one piece of the puzzle that they had to get through. And, what we've done at CFDA around manufacturing specifically, and I'll just be very brief on this, but because there's lots of information on cfda.com you can look up on this program, but we felt that there was a need to invest into domestic manufacturing. As we all know, the levels of domestic manufacturing for fashion were very much diminished as comparative to what it used to be, especially in New York and LA and many other, major cities throughout the United States. And so that's something that we invested into since 2013 through our fashion manufacturing initiative. And that's just one piece to show that it's really important to think of every step of the process, and manufacturing being one of the greatest processes that you go through in the supply chain, to make sure that it really is strengthened and it is a strong resource for designers. Because I personally consider domestic manufacturing for a US designer to be more sustainable than going overseas for a few different reasons. Yes, there's really some incredible overseas manufacturers, and yes, there's also some bad players in the United States, fashion manufacturing sector also. So I would never say that it's a perfect system. Far from it, honestly. But you think about regulations as far as workforce that are enforced in the United States versus elsewhere, and but even still, there's slipping through the cracks. The Garment Worker Center out of LA is trying to work on many of the issues that LA has around manufacturing, and you hear the stories in New York as well. But there's more put in place as far as the processes go for domestic manufacturing that really do speak to a more sustainable practice than international. But and that's everything, like I said, from the workers to a more localized supply chain as well that really doesn't take as much transportation or carbon emissions or whatever that speaks to. You're much closer to the end consumer, you're much closer to the designer and the supplier, well, sometimes the supplier depending on the supply chain, and then the manufacturer as well. So it really kind of localizes the entire chain to get rid of some of those different areas. But again, always room for improvement, because as you said, manufacturing is such a small piece still within a much greater issue around sourcing, around the people making it, around the different environmental impact as well, that you need to really consider for as a designer these days.
Yeah. So you brought up localization, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a bit, because I have a particular interest in it as well. But just on a broader scale, how does sustainability tie back to the supply chain and the manufacturing and the technical design and da 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 da?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of what I was just briefly saying in the last question is that there's so many avenues that you can change within your supply chain, which I think we can all probably agree is the most unsustainable area of the fashion industry. When you think about water usage, you think about dyeing, you think about the logistics and the shipping of everything, you think about the type of materials used, the poly bags that are thrown away immediately once they get to a retailer's hands or the end consumer's hands, but it's a regulation piece. It's the hangers being used. And so the tie between sustainability and supply chain is just so critical, and also it's so apparent within the two that they are so tied together. So I feel like what we want to do is within as an industry leader within creating programs for designers, we really want to speak to supply chain and sustainability as if they're one, because we really do feel like they are one. And so thinking about those different areas of focus and different programs that we can operate and develop that can tie resources back to designers for more sustainable packaging, or thinking about the entire material kind of puzzle that they go through, as kind of honestly, I always call it a gateway drug into sustainability, which is the materials. It really is the first thing most people say they would shift within their supply chain to become more sustainable. And so I think that, again, it just ties back to every single aspect that these designers need to go through, that they need to shift to become more sustainable within their business model. And it's not just, I think you mentioned this, within a pre-conversation that we had before, is it's a big word. And, it's not just one aspect, it's the entire business model that needs to shift to become more responsible and more sustainable, to actually be able to tell or communicate to your consumer that you are a sustainable business and you have sustainable products as well.
So do you think it helps business to help sales if that tag is on the clothing?
I think it has. I think that we're in the process of consumers realizing that greenwashing is a real thing. And so I do think that at the very beginning, slapping the word sustainable, or responsible on your product probably, either tricked the consumer or taught the consumer something, depending on what the company was. Some were actually, more responsible companies than others. But so I do feel like we're in the shift now that it's almost just like this ubiquitous, marketing term that I feel like now it's really driving the consumer to say, well, I want to know more, and I want you to be more transparent within your supply chain and around where it's sourced, who makes it, where it ends up, in its end life cycle. How do I recycle it? How do I sell it back to you and get, a credit? There's many different opportunities there. So I do feel like we're in that shifting time where it's, the consumer is probably a little bit confused, but also if you can, very clearly demonstrate what you're doing to be more sustainable within your business, I do think that and in the end, you're going to find the consumers. And I think, luxury products, for the most part, I won't say everything because that there are still luxury products being made for no money throughout the world. They've always used that as an investment, versus a throwaway item, like a fast fashion item. And so they kind of started off in that sense of being more sustainable in that direction because you're going to end up keeping it for much longer. But then there's just so much more that the consumer now, asks for around the actual product, around the materials and the people and everything else, like I was mentioning, to actually invest into that product still, whether it's $10 or $5,000.
So you think the consumer is becoming more educated about it? It sounds like that's what you're saying.
I definitely think so. I think that there's more education and just more, and within that education, there's more of a push from the consumer to actually drive these businesses to become more sustainable and responsible overall. I will say that.
So a designer is designing clothing. Why should they be concerned about sustainability?
I think if they don't, they'll be left behind. I really think that if they're not considering these things, there's again enough drive from the consumer, and a growing drive, I should say, from the consumer to invest into products that they actually believe in, and invest into companies that they have shared values with as well. So I do feel like if they don't, they're going to be, left behind the business, and the business will suffer overall. If they don't want to do that, obviously that's their choice. But I think as much as you've seen, as much change that has happened over the last few years, especially within, the drive for the consumer to actually want products like this, I think that they should be smarter than that, and they need to adapt very quickly, within some of these practices. But I will say that one thing that I think also you can't do is completely shift your business in every aspect at once. I think sustainability is a journey, and a step-by-step journey for that matter. And if you're already a business, you need to, take the baby steps and communicate that very clearly to your consumer around what you're doing to be more responsible within your business, and show that in the next 5 years, you're going to do X, Y, Z as well to do that. And so I feel like that's really important for the brand to consider, speaking about. And I would just say overall, I personally think there's already too many brands in the world, which has been an effect from digitization and all these different the internet and Instagram and social media and everything like that. But I think if you are going to start a business, you 100% need to have sustainability at the core of your values and your internal and external communication and structure to really contribute great things to the industry, and not get us more into the hole of being one of the most unsustainable industries in the world. And so I do feel like it has to be the priority, and it needs to almost be the given.
Yeah. So do you feel that the responsibility lies more with the specifier, the retailer and the brand, more so than the manufacturer itself?
I think I would rather put the responsibility on everyone, if I could, whether it's the consumer, the retailer, the brand, the supplier, everyone between, where everyone has a piece of this. And I do feel like, again, though, if you're going to start the fashion business, you need to have that at the core of what you want to do, and start off in a really good spot. But I do think that what I've seen is, which is really interesting, is more of the designers using their power to actually make the supplier change. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's everyone's responsibility to make the changes in their business to become more responsible. But I do think that because brands have a lot of leverage over these suppliers and manufacturers and different companies and retailers as well, they can definitely make a lot of change if they really want to and they really push that. But I'm sure they get so much pushback as well from their suppliers as well. So it really needs to be kind of like balanced between everyone. The retailer, of course, is a big piece of it all as well. Speaking to the consumers about this, making them aware of what the brand is doing to become more sustainable, or the sustainable product aspects of the product as well. So I do think it, kind of is split up between all, but I do think there's leverage in certain areas for brands to actually help make the change within certain aspects of their own supply chain. And then we just have to hope that the responsibility kind of falls onto the other partners as well, to create the chain effect from there, the trickle down.
Yeah, it would seem that I don't know if it's the biggest responsibility, but the first responsibility should come from the supplier. Because if they're not going to push the manufacturer to change at all, the manufacturer probably won't. If their environmental laws in their countries are not the same as ours, then they won't do it just on for good graces. But so I think you're right. It has to be a core value of the company, of what I call a specifier, to affect those changes.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So I was looking around your website, and it's a great website. It's got a lot of information on it, and I would really urge anybody who's interested in sustainability to go on there, the cfda.com, I think, not .org. It had some great essential tools for sustainability, like checklists on if you how to start it and how to do it right. And, just a lot of really good information on there. But so I definitely would take the time and look at that. But there was a mention there about Higgs index, which I just recently heard about. So I was just curious. Is that effective? Is that does that help you with I guess grading your supply chain and finding out where there might be room for improvement? Does it help the manufacturer at all? Does it go to that extent?
Sure. Yeah. So the Sustainable Apparel Coalition that operates the Higg Index, and was a creator of it, is a very strong alliance of ours. So we have many of those alliances across sustainability within the different organizations that are very much leading the charge for the industry to push that forward, from the massive fast fashion brands all the way down to the startups that very much the CFDA works with in majority of our membership as well. And so I do think that those alliances are really important. I would say that as far as how we engage with them, we're more thought leaders together. And so how we build relationships with people like the SAC and the Higg Index team is they are able to share information with our designers, with our manufacturers as well. We actually just spoke to them a few weeks ago around creating more opportunities for factories to think about how they can use the tools that the SAC operates and manages to become more responsible within the different tools that they have. So I do think that's definitely something that we push forward. We don't have really our own, of course, supply chain within the organization as much, but we very much try to stay within the different responsibilities and the different values that they put together for any of the organizations that are kind of like their official alliances or partners within their organization, to make sure that we are upholding a lot of those different values and promoting the different tools that they have to drive our members to become more sustainable within the different areas that they actually focus on. So there's just one of a few different organizations that we work with. Like, for instance, and actually to kind of your point about the cfda.com resources is in April next month, we'll be working with the United Nations and their campaign that they'll be doing around a virtual kind of trade show of sorts, where they're putting together a lot of different resources for different organizations, different companies that are helping to move their sustainability development goals into fruition across many different sectors throughout the world. And so we actually put a lot of our resources from cfda.com in like this virtual booth that you can go visit, learn about what we do, learn about how it actually helps with their goals, their SDGs as well. And again, make that alliance more official within those leaders that are really driving it forward, and then give our designers the information and the access to those tools to actually make it happen as well. And then the SAC or the UN or any of these other groups take it from there around what their actual processes are to uphold some of those different changes that the designers can make.
So, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that Higgs, it sounds like, digs a little deeper into sustainability and processes within the supply chain. That would be more of an actual tool on the floor that the CFDA is just kind of giving you more of a framework for that.
Yeah, I think that the best thing that they do for the Higgs index is actually it's quantifies sustainability. It creates numbers that you can really calculate and hold yourself up against to become more sustainable. And their tools are all based on that. So it actually, really puts something down on paper versus saying, I'm switching to organic cotton, versus a normal cotton, or I'm switching to a compostable plastics for a virgin plastic for my poly bags. The tools actually allow you to build in those numbers to say, what is this actually changing in my business, and how is it actually, benefiting the environment, the supply chain, the workers, whatever that is, into different positive change.
Right, like as you mentioned before, you can't go in and do it all in one full swoop.
Right.
But this will, I guess, let you know where you'll get the most bang for your buck if you do make changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's interesting. So we kind of touched about it before, but this is one thing that kind of, I don't know, drive me crazy would sound a little dramatic, but there seems sustainability, and I just got into it over the last few months, looking at it and interviewing people, but sustainability seems to be like a catch-all phrase.
Mm-hmm.
It could mean the amount of water intake a dye kettle has, but it could also mean racial equality or women's empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you separate the social issues from the real mechanics of a supply chain?
I mean, I think that people fill the supply chain, and I think it's really important to consider people within what you're trying to do to become more sustainable. Jen Guarino, who's the CEO of the Industrial Sewing and Innovation Center, or ISAC, that I actually sit on the board of, they're based in Detroit. She always says that you can't, if you want to call a product sustainable, but it's made by people that don't have sustainable lives, you can't really call it a sustainable product. And then on top of that, you need to think about the materials, the processes, the packaging, everything else, of course, but the people are really at the center of that. And I 100% agree with that sentiment, because you really need to consider the different processes that you're doing, the different communities that you're working with, to make sure that you are empowering women, you're giving equitable opportunity to people of color, you're uplifting communities that you have either your facility in or your suppliers work with, to really consider that as a top priority, whether it's the vendors you choose, the team you hire, and everything between, to make sure that you really are considering that. And I think that honestly, using like some of those worksheets that you mentioned to say, what questions are you asking your factories overseas or domestically, to ensure that that the workers are getting paid fair wages, they don't have bad processes or different HR issues that are causing these people to not really have sustainable lives, and instead focus on vendors and companies that you can kind of track and again quantify some of those changes that are made. And I think that's where you really kind of make the change within the people, from again your internal team all the way out to every single vendor you're working with, and selecting that. And I do think there's been a big shift within that, of course, over the last year, to think about every single vendor you're working with, and what are their values, like what have they done to to empower women, or, you know, give those equitable, you know, opportunities to people of color and everything else, to align with what you really want to do. And the supply chain is the perfect way to do that, I think, because it is such a global network, and you really need to consider that if you're going to, you know, end up saying within that journey of sustainability that you're really, you know, helping people and the planet, you know, in the end through your product. So I think it's a core piece of that.
So how do you know that a dye house in Sri Lanka is paying their people properly?
I mean, I think, you know, it depends on, obviously, if you have means to do more of like the social compliance audits and different ways that actually can formalize that, versus you have leverage over the brand because you're, you know, a big client of theirs. I don't have experience doing social compliance audits with international partners, but we actually required social compliance audits for our factories that we were giving financial grants to for our fashion manufacturing initiative program. So we looked at the wages, we looked at, you know, the health and safety pieces of the factories. And if you've ever been in a New York City factory, they're very compact, I'll say in a nice way, spaces that, you know, you need to consider those different aspects of how they're actually treating it. So there are more formal ways to do that. I do know that there's more and more resources out there that really map some of those things. So you can kind of almost jump on the coattails of a H&M who happened to do a social compliance audit with this factory in Sri Lanka or wherever, and get some of that information that's more public. It's obviously still a growing kind of area of growth for resources as far as, you know, other brands being able to access that information, but there definitely are more of those formal ways to do it. And then I will just say, you know, I really think there's a shift that I've seen within the factories that we work with, or we suggest to our designers in the US, that they're very much more open to being transparent, because they know that's actually going to get the designer in the door and get them to actually continue working with them. Because again, it's that, you know, ripple effect of who's asking who the right questions and who's demanding the answers in the end to end up, you know, as a consumer with that information as well.
So that's on the social compliance side. What about, you know, the environmental side? Do you think that, to me, that's where it started, right? That sustainability was really about the environment, and these other issues started to kind of piggyback onto it. It makes sense, you know, to be part of it, but environmentally, you know, so I think of, because I'm in the color business, I think about dye stuffs, and I think about you know, wastewater and the amount of water that has to be used to, you know, to dye a product, or, you know, just for a manufacturing process. So how does a company know that ABC mill in Pakistan is being compliant?
I mean, I think that, you know, I'm speaking very broadly without, you know, having firsthand experience in some of these things, you know, but understanding kind of like the companies that are out there that we speak to and the resources that we know of is, I think, going back to the Higg Index, I think that's a great example of how you actually do that. It is really environmental impact and quantifying that in certain instances where the supplier actually ends up, it sounds like, onboarding onto the Higg Index tools. So you can actually quantify it from the supplier side as well as the brand side as well. And so it really kind of touches every stage of the supply chain. But again, regulation, I think, is, you know, of course, always something that helps. And again, you know, many countries throughout the world have, you know, interesting government, you know, structure that, you know, it causes loopholes to happen, and including the US, I'm sure, you know, in certain instances. But I think you really need to do the research more on like the different pieces like that to ensure that there's also kind of structure within regulations also. So I think there's a few different kind of areas within the regulation piece, and then some of those more like quantifiable tools as well, to think of the numbers associated with how many gallons of water are being used and in different pieces like that. Because I think a lot of people will be surprised if they're just starting their supply chain journey around fashion products, is that, you know, a lot of, especially the major factories, they know that they could, one day be, audited by one of their biggest, clients, whether it's Zara, H&M, anyone else throughout the world. And so I think they really are making the shifts to say, we're using a really incredible technology around denim dyeing, or indigo dye, that, takes out 90% of the water usage. And so there's already those pieces that they're already shifting because they know some of their biggest players are asking for it. And then they are, of course, then willing to say to a new client of theirs or someone they're working with that they're doing X, Y, and Z to make that shift, because pretty much just because their large clients are asking for it, but it actually affects the rest of the clients within their ecosystem as well. So I think there's more of that like conversing also that can shift that. And then of course, you always should be thinking about the different checklist items that you should be doing around visiting the sites if you can, and really kind of like interviewing the people within the organization. We interviewed workers within all of our compliance audits as well, around what is actually happening behind the scenes as it relates to the environmental piece and the social piece as well.
Interesting. So you touched on H&M, Zara, which I was going to ask you. Is fast fashion compatible with this whole sustainability drive? It would seem like it would be difficult.
I think any large company that wants to make change, it's very difficult to make change into such a massive corporation. But it also could be very easy with the, kind of extended and limitless resources that some of these companies really have to make the change. And again, if they're getting in a PR crisis, they overdrive and they automatically, change something immediately and overnight, which, you always ask the question, why didn't you do that before, until a crisis happens. But so I do think that fast fashion, it's going to be harder for them, but I think it's a critical sector or piece of the industry that has to become more sustainable, because that really is, that the global consumer is connecting more with fast fashion than ever before. And so all these other price points, whether it's luxury, the bridge, contemporary price points are of course just as important, but these are the clothes that are, $10 that, are, you think it's impossible to make a $10 sweater, without actually breaking the rules and causing impact to the people and to the environment. So I think it's really critical. How they do that, it's been interesting to see. It's been very, very surface level changes that I've noticed just purely from being a consumer, whether it's the recycling programs for jeans at H&M, or it's just the shift in some of the materials. Like, again, it's kind of like that gateway drug into it and to making that first step. But I don't know how much they're actually speaking to what the real change that they're making is within their supply chains. And I don't know how easy it's going to be for them to be able to do that. It's maybe a sustainable capsule collection, but it's actually just a limited run, and they're shifting that. But we've seen it before. We've been able to actually do really interesting capsule collections with people like Lexus, people like Banana Republic, around domestic production, and thinking about much more sustainable collections as well, whether it's the materials or the packaging, or where it's being produced, or the processes that it's being produced with the manufacturing. So I do think it's possible, but they have a lot to work up against. It's a very complicated system versus a brand new, company that's very nimble and flexible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always think of that time when H&M burned, like, I forget what the number was, $500 million worth of clothing because it was, just a victim of fast fashion. It just wasn't going to sell.
That's a big change that have to happen to stop doing that, and yes, they probably did for, and hopefully they are continuing that, but you also saw it in luxury brands. They also got caught doing that. So I do think, like my note earlier, that the bad players are not just the fast fashion players, but there's massive luxury brands, I'm sure, that can do so much more, to become more sustainable, and they're making the same mistakes, and the same negative impact as a fast fashion brand is. And they're actually making probably more money because they're selling their products for way more expensive, prices in the end to the consumer.
Wait a second. Are you saying there's some sleazy players in the garment business?
Garmentos, I don't know, but it's all over the world, I will say. And I think it definitely falls into every level.
So you touched before on the supply chain initiative, and I read about it a little bit today, but it sounded pretty interesting. Could you just briefly tell us about that?
The Supply Chain Collective specifically. So that one, yeah, is started off last year, and actually, honestly, really, unfortunately, didn't pick up as much as we thought it would be doing right now because of people lacking interest of actually connecting with new partners in their supply chain, because they were actually just trying to figure out how to get rid of their products that they had just produced, and then their retailers canceled during early phases of COVID. So but this program is called the Supply Chain Collective, and we're continuing it now very loosely to, again, make sure that these designers have access to global supply chain partners. And this program specifically really does drive the sustainability message forward. So thinking about how we connect a designer interested in changing their virgin plastic poly bags to a more sustainable option in like the spectrum of sustainability as it relates to plastics, which is something that we have through Cfda, which is a Israel-based compostable plastics company that works with Gabriela Hearst, Mara Hoffman, Stella McCartney, and a few others as well. That is a better option for our designers. But the program is actually built to take away some of the hurdles for designers who can't access the resources or the vendors, whether it's their products or services. And so, for example, TIPA has really high minimums for their products. And so the smaller brands who really want to drive that into their supply chain for compostable plastics couldn't access it. And so what we did is offer a small minimum quantity program between the partner and ourselves, so some of our smaller designers can actually access the resources like that. We're working with Arch and Hook out of the UK around more sustainable hanger options, Apparel Magic for inventory management, which I think speaks to sustainability as well, around not overproducing or really managing your systems to make sure that that you're not overproducing goods, but you're still providing enough goods for the demand that's coming in. Bergen Logistics for international or for distribution and warehousing. Swatch on for more international fabric sourcing out of South Korea, and they have a big push for more sustainable and dead stock materials as well. So really bringing together all those resources into one program that, again, just makes it more of a discovery moment, yes, for the designer, but then actually connects them directly to the vendor for them to go explore that avenue to say, I either didn't know about you, I couldn't access you, and now I'm getting a special benefit from the CFDA to have lower minimums, have better customer service or stronger or more advanced customer service, discounted pricing, whatever it is for each partner. They bring that to the table for CFDA's consideration, and then they're promoted as one of these educators of products and services to our designers to, again, make that discovery moment happen.
Okay, neat. There was one question from one of our listeners that said, what does fashion sustainability look like in 25 years from now? Are we all going to get to the place where we need to?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, 25 years, yeah, it's a long time, but I will say that, speaking back to the fast fashion piece, is that many of these massive companies, whether they're in fashion or not, have like the 2030 by 2050 by 2060 goals, being the carbon neutral, company. And so I feel like between small businesses and the medium-sized, business enterprises of the fashion world, I do think in 25 years you can make a near complete, kind of shift within your supply chain that can really ensure that you are a fully or near fully sustainable brand. And yes, you're making products still, so there is still that cycle of like more products in the world that really probably isn't needed, overall, but it drives business forward. And but I think that innovation will be key within the next 25 years, from the processes happening to how the businesses within the designer fields are talking about circularity and end of use, and taking things that they sold to consumers and taking it back and regenerating it into new products, or down to the yarn, or just kind of like interesting ways of design, whether it's like the patchworking kind of method or whatever it is. But I do feel like that's going to be a big push. And I think, again, 25 years is a long time for the consumer to change as well. And I feel like they're only going to continue to drive it forward. And so I think by that point, again, if you're starting a business, or you have a designer business within fashion or many other sectors, it sounds like, you're going to need to have that as the front and center by that point, to be the only important thing, or one of the most important things in their business to survive, I think, overall. But it's hard to even predict what's going to happen tomorrow these days. Sure. So 25 years is a scary thought, honestly.
Yeah. And it's an ever evolving thing too, right? Yeah. There's not one point you get there and you say, I'm there. Because then there's another new technology that comes down the pike that you might have to put in place. So
absolutely.
So you were touching before about localization, and that's of particular interest to me. Why does having more manufacturing here in the U.S. Why does that help improve sustainability?
I think overall, I would actually like to talk about it in a more global sense, where dependent on where the consumer is and the partners that are actually creating the product, that's what I consider localization. Yes, if you are a US-based designer that really only sells to US consumers, I think localization would mean sourcing the materials from the US, producing the materials within the US and shipping it only within the US, where localization can actually happen. But we have like an interesting trend within menswear brands, is that they actually do best in countries like Japan. And they love Japanese textiles to begin with, because they're some of the most, strongest and best textiles in the world. And why would you consider getting all of your materials in Japan, shipping it over to Italy or to the US, manufacturing it there, and then send it right back to the consumer in Japan? So that could be a localized opportunity for this brand to really think about what impact they can make to, really invest more into that international market and community, thinking about what business you're actually bringing into that country to create economic impact. The less travel that the product has to take, the better, as far as environmental causes as well, or impact there around carbon usage and everything there. And then of course thinking about the technology being used within the country that you're operating within is definitely something that will be important. But I think it's all about thinking about where you are, where your partners are, and where the end consumer is, and really thinking about that in a much more intelligent way, really, and in a really analytical way, to say, Russia is my biggest market. Let's get as close as we possibly can there, where yes, maybe we're still designing in New York, and we're doing sampling there, which doesn't connect, as much to the production processes, but we're finding, someone much closer to the end consumer, where those goods are being, created and shipped off straight there. And then our summer dresses do really well in the US, so let's make those in the US and change that to really think about how you diversify that. Because I do think the connection between localization and diversifying supply chains are the two things that people, as far as brands go and designers, have been thinking about a lot more because of COVID. And so you really need to think about all the designers that I heard that were pulling their products out of Italy when Italy was getting, really bad within COVID, where they were reliant on that one area as well, when really they could have, had their products here, and they actually finished their products in the US, because that was kind of the last section of the world to actually, be hit with COVID at a really strong level. And so those two things I think are really important. And I think they very clearly connect to the sustainable aspects of your supply chain around what you can do to create that economic impact and benefit the planet and the ecosystem of people as well around where you're supplying and producing.
Yeah, just some question about whether there's every piece that you need to produce goods here, at least in the US, is here. Is there enough sewing and finishing available? There's really a lack of people that can do that. which
Absolutely.
surprises the hell out of me because you would
Yeah.
think. But I worked in the New York area and sold raw materials to people who made sweaters.
Mhm.
And sweater manufacturing was, 70% of the sweaters in the US were made in the metropolitan area.
Yep.
But there was certainly, sewers and everything, knitting machines mostly, that you would need to make that product right here, dye houses. But it's not here anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The material sourcing is one thing that is still lacking, especially in the US, that you can't find as much, whether it's like the closing of Cone Denim, in the Carolinas, to, many other closures of different companies throughout the last 60 years or so, where you can still manufacture the finished good here, but you're still going to get the materials from elsewhere in the world almost
Right.
exclusively, but there are interesting business models happening where they're using vintage fabrics or only US made fabrics, like someone like a Bodhi who's using, dead stock and a lot of domestic fabrics to fill most of her collections. And so the shift is happening. It's a reality that there's not as many options domestically as far as sourcing goes to do that. And 100% agree with you on the lack of skilled technicians, sewers, and different, craftspeople within the United States, especially within a younger generation. It's a much older generation that are retiring out of their jobs, that there's not as much to attract someone into a job of manufacturing in the United States than there was before.
Yeah. Well, I have other questions, but I don't want to take that much more of your time. But I do want to ask just a kind of an oddball question, and just how did you get to this sustainability piece of your career, and what was that career path like?
Sure. I'll do like a short version as much as I can, but I'm in
the short version.
industry. I haven't been in the industry that long, so I guess it's not too long. But anyway, I think the biggest thing for me since I was a freshman in college is making sure that I have a diverse set of skills within everything I'm doing and my interest level. And so I think what I did starting from school very briefly is just created my own program to actually build the skills that I wanted to have, whether it was photography, graphic design, art history. I studied journalism and writing. And so I kind of build out that skill set, which, some of those skills I'm not using in my job now, but I would say majority of people are not using the skills from their college careers. But, and then outside of school is shifting into learning about the CFDA. I learned everything about the industry from Tumblr, which was, at the time for me, this, incredible platform to actually learn every designer's name, every model's name, everyone that was important, in the industry around who they were, what were they doing. And so a lot of education through just kind of like that guerrilla, kind of like social media aspect of learning to really kind of build out my education. And then moving to New York on a whim for, internships and doing things like that to actually try marketing, try PR, working in-house at a few designers, and then working more on like the editorial based, side of the business to learn more about that. And again, that opens opportunities to hear about the innovators of the industry, the top designers, the people that are moving the industry in a very specific way, and being behind the scenes about writing about that. And then making my way to CFDA, where I have to say, I've been given so many opportunities to switch what my area of focus was. I started with corporate partnerships and tying together, again, those like fashion adjacent companies, bringing them into the fold of fashion, and in the end, benefiting the designer during the program that we had, the partnership, and then switching into partnership management of the fashion manufacturing initiative specifically, where I learned more about the manufacturing processes. I have no background in supply chain, in sustainability. It's all learned on the job. And, I just happen to just like really be very understanding and know the knowledge behind what it actually designers go through by just being adjacent to the designer, not even being the designer myself or having that experience. And so you hear the side effects of being a fashion business owner, and you hear the trials and tribulations of that, as well. And so then I just, with my team, we put together more ideas to actually expand upon manufacturing and make it a bigger pillar for CFDA into supply chain. Because when you hear 100 people say they're having an issue with, accessing better packaging or, more sustainable materials, fabrics or, jewels or whatever it ends up being for their product, you answer that call and you switch, and you evolve the programs that you're operating and building to serve the people that who are paying you really in the end to build this organization and build those educational opportunities and those opportunities for growth potential and for connections with those partners and vendors. So it really did come from a need basis from the designers that we serve within the organization. So just kind of navigated through all that, and I very much am the kind of like nerd in the corner that likes to talk about sourcing and fabric and the technical side of things without really having studied it. It's just more of like the discovery moment for me, and then again following that need from the designer to kind of merge my interests with what the industry actually needs right now to shift and become a better industry.
Cool. Well, I appreciate what you're doing, and it's to me it's very interesting, and I hope that the audience got something out of it. But that's about it. Cal, hang on for a second because I wanted to say a couple of things to you.
But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you very much to Cal. Really appreciate it. We'll keep going on our Columbia Omni Studio expert interview series, and we'll keep doing this. As long as you guys are listening, we'll keep doing it. So I really appreciate Cal, and really what I think is just a very interesting story about sustainability and how much, I think what Cal got across to us is how much sustainability is going to play a factor in our job in the next 10, 20, whatever years, depending on your age. But it's a factor, and it's not going away. And these are things that we have to consider for our jobs, I think, in a major way. So I thank Cal for doing that.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.